There's an abandoned hotel in my town that's been vacant for decades. It had been bought out several times before, but every time they ended up going bankrupt after just a few years. Our town is small and kind of old-fashioned, so there's really no reason for anyone to visit unless they have family here, which means that there's really no reason to even have a hotel as big as this one was. It was at least 6 stories and was probably the largest building in our town. Anyway, when I was 23, I just casually decided to check it out. I felt like there was nothing actually dangerous or scary about it. It was just an empty abandoned building that would be cool to walk around and look at. I decided to go during the day because I figured that if anyone was there during the daytime, then they were probably just harmless people exploring it like me. I parked at a store that was a half-mile away, then walked to the hotel. It was mostly isolated on the side of the road, being that most of the stores surrounding it had already been torn down. The hotel itself, though, looked a lot worse than the last time I'd seen it. The brick was crumbling, and the whole place seemed like it was fading and decaying. I went up to the front and glanced inside. It was mostly empty, with only a few things scattered around, like chairs and old furniture. I stepped in and walked through the lobby, opening the door to the staircase. The whole stairwell was covered in shadows, as barely any light was getting in. All I could see was a dim beam of light coming from one of the floors above. It was only just enough for me to find my way up the stairs, but when I got to the door on the 2nd story, it was blocked. Something on the other side was keeping it from opening, and a sheet of wood was covering the window and the door. I left it and continued up to the 3rd story, opening the door and entering the hallway. This was probably the most creepy setting I'd ever been in. The hallway was dark and musty, with only a small window on either end to light up the corridor. I walked down a little bit, then went into the first room with an open door. Oddly, it looked kind of normal. There were layers of dust covering everything, but all the furniture was set up as if it had never been moved. There were even towels and soap left in the bathroom still. As I was looking at all of this, I heard a small thump. I turned around and faced the doorway, not sure if that was from the floor I was on or the one below me. A few seconds later, quiet footsteps creaked the floorboards coming down the hallway. As they got closer, I just stared at the doorway and hoped that they weren't on my floor. After a few seconds though, I heard them stop, followed by a door opening and then slamming shut on the floor below me. Afterward, there were no footsteps or really any sounds at all. I tried to be quiet, walking up to the hallway and looking out to make sure nobody else was here. Thinking about it though, I couldn't see why another person just exploring the place would walk so deliberately to a room and slam the door. And the more I thought about it, the more nervous I got. Only adding to the eeriness was how silent the whole place was now. After a minute of standing in the hallway and thinking, I'd had enough. I quietly walked back to the staircase and opened the door, entering the dark stairwell and starting to descend. There was no way to be quiet on the metal stairs. Each step was an unavoidable hollow thump. But as I passed the door to the 2nd story, I noticed a small gap in the doorway that definitely wasn't there before. Then I looked down at the stairs ahead of me. A figure stood in the stairwell only a few steps below me, barely visible in the darkness, but their eyes stared right at me. They looked dreadful and emotionless. With no choice, I started carefully walking on the edge of the staircase, passing by them with only a couple feet between us, as his eyes followed every move I made. Once I got to the bottom, I opened the door and ran out into the lobby where I could finally see clearly. I hurried back to my car and sat in the parking lot for a while. Looking back, that was probably the dumbest thing I'd ever done. I guess I just didn't realize what I was walking into. I'm not sure why that person was there or what they were doing, but leaving when I did was probably the only good decision I made. I go camping with my dad every summer. He's done it his whole life, and recently I've gotten into it as well. I'm 16, and last year my dad and I went out on our seasonal camping trip. We found the spot online together while looking for a new camping area to try out for the summer. There's no pictures of the area, but the map was easy to follow, and the description of the trail was that it was easy and uncrowded. We set out on Friday morning, parking on the side of the road and beginning down the trail. After the first quarter mile, it was clear that the description wasn't very accurate. It was pretty steep in some parts, and a lot of the trail was muddy or overgrown, which made it actually really hard. Already being there though, we just pushed through and eventually got to the campsite. It looked no different than the woods on the trail that we had been walking on for the past 2 hours. There were trees everywhere and just a plot of overgrown grass to set our stuff up on. No cool views or anything. We pitched our tents and made lunch. My dad was a bit of a talker, so the rest of the day we were just in conversation. Once the sun was starting to set, we walked around the trees near the campsite and collected some dry sticks to make a fire with. In the middle of us talking though, we were interrupted by a loud voice behind us. We both stopped talking and spun around. The woods were suddenly quiet again, and we didn't see anyone there. It sounded not too far away though, like maybe a mile out. Neither of us said anything for 30 seconds, just staring at the trees and trying to spot any movement. Then it came again. Ah. Someone, a man's voice, yelling. It sent chills through me. There was a pain and harshness to the scream, like they were in trouble. I looked up at my dad, who looked really conflicted and worried. He turned me around and led me back to the campsite, quickly starting the fire. The screams kept coming though, and eventually I asked my dad if we should help them. I could tell my dad was thinking of every option. He faced me and told me to stay by the fire and wait. His face was serious, and he said he was going to run a little ways toward the voice and just see what he could see, and that if I saw anyone, to not let them near me. I agreed and watched him run toward the man's voice. After a minute, he was out of sight. Honestly, I wasn't sure what I would have done if I were in my dad's shoes. Leaving someone in need of serious help would make me feel horrible. But we were also in the middle of the woods, so if something happens, well, I don't know. After 10 minutes, I started to get a little worried. The sun felt like it was dropping fast, and there was still no sign of my dad. But then, suddenly, the screaming stopped. The whole forest was now quiet again. I wondered if my dad had found him and was helping him, or if something else happened. Still, after another 10 minutes, my dad was nowhere in sight. With the blanket of darkness starting to cover the forest, I grew more and more nervous. I stood off and walked a little bit away from the campsite and toward where my dad had gone. There were still no signs of him, so I walked a little more, and then, finally, I heard footsteps from up ahead. I still couldn't see anything, but as the sound of his steps started getting closer and closer, an eerie, almost disturbing feeling came over me. Then, just before I thought they would come into my sight, a voice to my left called my name. It was my dad running toward me and yelling at me to go back. There was urgency and worry in his voice, so I hurried to the campsite. My dad followed behind me. He quickly packed the essentials into his backpack. The look on my dad's face is something I still remember vividly. It was complete fear and distraught. We left the tents and ran for the first mile, then fast walked back to our car. On the drive home, I asked him what he saw out there, who the man was, and why he was screaming. My dad said nothing. Even to this day, he never brings it up or says anything of what he saw. Every time I so much as mention that day, his entire demeanor changes and his face falls flat. So I just stopped asking. All I can think about now is those footsteps that I heard walking toward me, and what would have happened if my dad hadn't shown up in time. I was out camping in a familiar part of the forest near my city. My city is small and honestly has not much to do, so camping is the one thing I found that I really enjoy doing. I'm not a big fan on hiking though. I prefer the more relaxing aspects of camping, like sitting by a fire and having no responsibilities. The trail I went on was one I'd been to plenty of times. It was only a 30-ish minute walk from the parking area, and the campsite was right by a lake. Having only my small city near the forest, there's only so many people that could possibly be camping at the same time and place as I was. But this time when I got there, a man had a tent already set up. I could see him down by the lake, walking in the sand. He looked like he was in his 40s. He had some generic swimming shorts on and a stained white t-shirt. I walked a little further from where his tent was, then set up mine. I then collected some large stones from nearby and placed them in a ring, prepping for the campfire I was going to have later. As I did, I noticed the man looking at me. Not just like a glance though. He was standing down by the lake, with his body turned completely toward me, and was watching me. I tried to ignore it, but every time I looked back, he was in that same spot, and still staring at me. It got really creepy, so I ended up waving at him to see if he was maybe wanting to say hi or something. But after I waved, he turned around and continued walking along the lake. Whatever that was, I didn't like it. It gave me an uncomfortable feeling about that guy, so I tried to keep an eye on him. For a while, nothing else really happened, but after 20 minutes, he walked away from the lake and into the forest behind his tent. I thought there might have been a trail back there, or he could have just been walking around, but whatever the case, I was just glad he was gone for now. I put my chair down by the lake and relaxed. I was down there for an hour or so before picking my chair back up and moving it back to my tent. The sun was setting, so I lit up my campfire. As I sat there and looked around at the forest, I suddenly spotted something. Far out, there was a shape next to one of the trees. I squinted, trying to get a clearer view. All I could make out was what looked like a white shirt. It was that guy again, and he was just standing far behind my campsite and staring in my direction. Now this was getting really creepy. How long was he watching me for? I moved my chair to the other side of the campfire so that I was now facing him, just so I didn't lose sight of him. He stayed there for a good 30 or 40 minutes, watching me from far out in the forest before it started to get dark out. The shadows everywhere started making it hard to see him anymore, and after a while, I couldn't even make out his shape. I could only look in the general direction he was in. Yet with my campfire lighting up my sight, I knew he could still see me. Knowing he was still out there staring at me, yet not being able to see anything, I started getting really anxious. I mean, what the hell was this guy doing? He had a tent here, like he was camping, but in the hours that I'd been here, I never once saw him go to it. With everything getting to my head, I debated packing up and leaving, but at this point, I was worried the guy would follow me out. So, I sat there and tended the fire, making sure it didn't go out, and I just waited. Several long, tiring hours passed, and I didn't see anything. He never came back to his tent, or came close enough for me to see him. When the sun started coming up, I looked all around and saw no signs of him. I packed up my gear and booked it back to my car. It's hard to know that guy's intentions. If I hadn't stayed awake and been cautious of him from the start, who knows where I'd be right now. I was taking a few days off and spending it camping in the woods. I was in some forest a few hours from my town and had set up camp at the end of a 4-hour trail. I'd spent the night there already and had noticed this thin path leading out from the campsite. I had no idea where it went, and it wasn't on the map of the area. But having nothing better to do on that second day, I thought I'd go for a short hike down the path just to see if it led anywhere cool. Maybe a small pond or a waterfall or something. I brought with me a backpack with food and water in case I'd be out longer than expected. Walking through the trail, it was very obvious that almost nobody used it, or at least hadn't used it in a long time, maybe even years. It was very thin and overgrown in a lot of sections, and I didn't see any signs of people, like shoe prints or anything. This went on for several miles, taking around 2 hours before I found the end, and it wasn't what I expected. There was a house, or cabin, sitting in the woods. At first sight, there was no mistaking that it was abandoned. Moss and vines were growing out of the wood siding, and the doors and windows were all open. Before approaching any further, I looked around at my surroundings, just checking for anything, as this wasn't a normal thing to just stumble across. The woods were calm and unsettlingly still. I went up to the doorway and poked my head in, looking down the front hallway. There was dust and debris lying all over the floors, but it was otherwise barren. I went in a little further. It smelled of mildew and rotting wood, but as I crept through the rooms, there wasn't much to see. Feeling uneasy though, I was about to turn around and leave, but a small glimmer caught the side of my eye. On one of the closed wooden doors, the handle had been ripped off and replaced by a silver padlock. It almost looked brand new and matched nothing else in the house. My curiosity immediately had me thinking of why there was a padlock on the door to an otherwise empty and ruined cabin. The more I looked at it though, That uneasy feeling just took over me, and I couldn't get myself to investigate. I quickly left the house and went back to the path. Just as I entered the trail again, I heard a single footstep on the wooden floor inside the house. I turned and looked at the doorway, but saw nothing. So I kept on walking, trying to distance myself from that place. As I walked back though, for the whole 2 hours, I kept hearing footsteps in the distance, like someone was following me. The trees densely covered the area though, making it impossible to see that far. When I got back to the camp, I got a fire going early and just sat and waited, listening and looking to see if anyone showed up. By nightfall, I hadn't heard anything else, but as the hours got later, I started hearing it again. Footsteps out in the distance, far beyond the light of the campfire, but definitely close enough for them to see the light. It went on for several hours, hearing a line of footsteps every 10 to 15 minutes. Still though, I was never able to see them, and eventually it got so late that I knew I had to sleep. So I left the campfire going as I got inside my tent. I was in and out of sleep for the rest of the night, waking up at every small sound the woods made. After getting almost no sleep, I left. What the cabin was doing there, and whoever had followed me that night, I'll never know. I can't say what they intended to do, but their disturbing stalking behavior only lets me assume the worst. But I can never seem to stop thinking about the disturbing possibilities of what was behind that locked door. Been seen again. This was a few months ago, while driving for DoorDash. I only drive as a side gig, maybe 10 to 15 hours a week. This night I was only doing a couple orders, since it was already late, and I had picked up a small order around 1 a.m. It was to be delivered to a business building somewhere across town, which was apparent by the address. This was a normal thing, usually for overnight workers or whatever. When I pulled into the parking lot though, it was empty. No cars at all, and it didn't look like there was a parking lot behind the building either. I parked in a spot near the front and got out with the food. The place was definitely an office building of some kind and was smaller than most, being only 2 stories and not very wide. All the lights were off in the windows though, aside from one light behind the front door. I walked up to the door and checked the app, seeing it has specific drop-off instructions to enter the main hallway and leave the bag outside of room 232. I looked through the door in the building, seeing this hallway with a bunch of closed doors on either side. Delivering to specific rooms I'd only done at hotels, so this was kind of new for me. I tested the door, pushing on it, and it was unlocked, so I stepped inside. I expected to hear people working, moving around, or talking, but instead didn't hear anything. There wasn't a single sound in the whole building. It was just white noise from the overhead lights buzzing above me. As I passed the first few doors though, they were all numbers in the 100s, like 102 and 106. The room the instruction said to leave it at was in the 200s, so I assumed that meant it was on the 2nd floor. In the middle of the hallway was the doorway leading to the staircase. It was held open with a wedge door stopper on the floor, but the lights weren't on. I stepped in and up to the bottom of the staircase, then looked up. The whole stairwell was pitch black. Not even any light was coming from above where the room was supposed to be for me to drop it off at. Again, I started to notice the eerie silence, and it sent a chill through me. I was always one to do whatever the instructions say, so I'd get good reviews. But this was the first time I told myself that this was too sketchy. I stepped out of the stairwell and back into the hallway, and just as I did, the door right across from me opened. The lights in that room were off, but a man emerged from behind the door and stepped into the hallway. He was wearing street clothes and just didn't look like an office worker at all. But he stood in front of me and pointed past me at the stairwell. 232 is up there. I nodded, but didn't move, and neither did he. He just looked me in the eyes with a look like he was suppressing his anger. After an intense few seconds, I dropped the bag on the ground and started quickly walking to the exit. The man didn't follow me, but I heard his footsteps go into the stairwell and up the stairs as I left the building. I got in my car and left. I didn't know what that was, or if I was maybe overreacting about it, so I didn't call the police. The following day, though, the police actually called me. Apparently the office reported a break-in, and in the CCTV footage, they saw my car and license plate, tracking it back to me. They also had footage of the break-in, and so they called me in to question me about any information I might have. I didn't have much to give, but it turned out there were actually 3 people that broke inside. One was downstairs, who I saw, but the other 2 were shown on the cameras to be hiding at the top of the stairs, seemingly waiting for me to go up. Disturbingly, several other delivery orders were made to that same office that night. All of the other drivers were smarter than I was, though, leaving the orders outside by the front door. What would have taken place in that office had any of us gone up to the second floor is unknown. But hopefully police can find the 3 men before anyone falls victim to it. I was driving back from my friend's place in Wisconsin. I live right outside of Chicago, which is about a 6-hour drive, so I decided to do it all in one go. However, I didn't anticipate leaving so late. I wasn't on the road until 8 p.m., but I absolutely had to be home for work the following day, so there was no option to hang out any longer. If you aren't familiar with Wisconsin, it's mostly flat with a ton of forests all over the northern parts and small towns scattered throughout. The biggest cities are closer to the border, nowhere near where I was. My buddy's place was in one of these small towns, so pretty much right out of the gates, it was barren forest roads. There were a few cars here and there, but once I was 30 minutes out and the sun had set, there wasn't a single other car. I probably went a whole 2 hours without seeing anyone else on the road. The endless flat forest on either side of me was so repetitive that it was making me sleepy. It definitely didn't help that I was so tired from hanging with my friend all weekend either. I was trying everything to stay awake, but at just around 11 p.m., I actually saw something up the road. I opened my eyes a bit wider and could tell it was a person. They were standing on the shoulder and had their thumb out, clearly looking for a ride. For some reason, the very first thought that came through my mind was that having company in the car would surely help keep me awake. I almost instinctively began slowing down, and as I got closer, they started walking down the shoulder toward my car. I rolled the window down and pulled up next to them. "Hey, I just need a ride into the next town, if you've got a spare seat for me." It was really dark out, and I couldn't see much of him, but he sounded tired. I let him into the back seat. It wasn't until I started pulling away that the thought even popped into my head about why he was out here. I mean, the middle of the woods, in the middle of the night, was kind of a weird place to be. I looked in the mirror. The guy was looking at me through the shadow that covered the back seat. He looked like he was 30-ish, with stubble and a buzz cut, but I didn't see a backpack or anything with him. "So, what brought you out here?" he asked me. I told him I was at my friend's place for the weekend and was heading back home to Chicago. Then I asked him the same question. His straight face turned into a fake smile. "Oh, I was just walking on a trail in the woods and got lost along the way. Found the road and figured it best to catch a ride." I thought about his answer for a second. I didn't know about any trails or really anything at all in these parts of the woods, but even if there was, he would have had to drive to get here. Why didn't he mention that? Wouldn't he want me to take him to the trailhead instead of into town? I don't know. I was more awake and aware now, and it was making me uneasy the more I thought about it. But then the guy suddenly told me to stop. He told me to pull over and drop him off here. I cautiously did as he said, pulling the car onto the shoulder and parking. We were maybe 5 miles down the road from where I picked him up, and there was still nothing but dense forest all around. The guy quickly opened the door, and without saying anything, he started rushing away, heading for the trees. I was super weirded out and concerned about this whole thing, and at this point I just wanted to get out of there. But he left the door open, and when I leaned into the back seat to shut it, I noticed a drawstring bag tucked under the passenger seat. It wasn't mine, it was definitely his. I called out for the guy, and he turned around. "Hey, you left your bag." He stood with a straight face and wide, frustrated eyes, staring at me for several uncomfortable seconds. Then he came back. "Your bag, you left it right here." I pointed under the seat. Then he hesitated for another several seconds before grabbing it abruptly and turning around, hurrying back into the forest. I reached over and shut the door, then left the area as fast as I could. I was relieved to be away from that guy, knowing that something was definitely up with him. But it was only a few minutes down the road that I started to pick up on an awful odor from the back seat. It got increasingly worse over the next 30 minutes until I got into another small town. I stopped at a gas station and used my phone light to look into the back seat. On the carpet under the passenger seat, right where the drawstring bag had been sitting, there was a deep red stain. I almost threw up as I ran into the gas station and called the police. I gave them all the info I had on what happened, and they cut out the piece of carpet from my car to get tested. They also did a search for the man, but came up empty-handed, only finding a few footprints near the spot I picked him up at. I don't know exactly what was in that bag, but it seems like he was trying to plant it in my car as a means to cover something up. We still have no idea who he was or what he was up to that night. I was working a quick DoorDash shift on a Monday night. I got out of my day job at 7 and decided to make a few deliveries. It was a pretty regular, quiet night with nothing much to note. I delivered about 7 or 8 orders before I took my last one for the night. I drove it down to the house and dropped it off, then started heading back into town where my apartment was. It was around 10 o'clock now, And after that delivery, I was about 20 minutes out in the farmland that surrounds our town. A couple minutes into my drive back, I saw a figure standing in the middle of the road. I slowed down, and the man moved over a little bit, but not enough to be out of my way. Once I got closer, he looked right at me and stuck his thumb out. In my headlights, I could tell he was an older guy, like early 50s, and he had a large backpack over his shoulders. Since I was already slowing down, I figured I'd be helpful and ask if he needed a ride into the city, since I was heading that way anyways. He leaned on the windowsill and thanked me for stopping. His eyes looked heavy and exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days, but he seemed nice enough, so I agreed to give him a ride. What I wasn't expecting, though, was for him to immediately open the passenger door and sit in the seat right next to me. It didn't really matter, I guess, but I felt like it was usually common courtesy to get in the back seat. As he got situated, I looked past him at where he came from. It was a field of tall grass, just a huge farm or something. "You from around here? What brings you out to the farmlands?" He looked over at me. "Just making my way across the country to visit my family. Don't have a car, so I've been hitching rides." I thought that was pretty interesting, so I asked more about where he was from, but he gave me very vague and uninterested answers. A couple times I caught him looking into my back seat. Not just quick glances though, like he was running his eyes through the whole back seat and looking for something. Something about this guy started to make me feel off. He wasn't talking much and was just acting really unusual. "Is everything okay?" I asked. I still had my eyes on the road, but he didn't say anything, so then I looked over at him. My eyes were drawn to his disturbing stare before I noticed the knife he had clenched in his right hand. "Stop the car." I didn't say a word and parked right in the middle of the road. I was terrified and just thought if I let him take whatever he wanted, then I'd get out unharmed, so that's exactly what I was going to do. As soon as the car was in park, I turned to open my door, but he quickly stopped me. "Get in the back," he demanded, still clenching the knife. I froze up for a moment, realizing we were in the middle of empty fields, and that if I get in the back, I'll probably never have another chance to escape. He told me a gun, and that's also when I noticed his large backpack was slightly open by his feet, revealing a thick bundle of rope. I had no choice but to try my luck escaping now, before it was too late. I opened the door and jumped out of the car in one swift motion. The man tried jumping across the front seat to grab me, but I sprinted to the other side of the road and into the tall grass. I kept on running through the field until I felt like he couldn't find me. Then I stood still and waited. He yelled a few times from the road, but then it went quiet. All I could hear was the wind blowing the grass around. I stood still and motionless for a good 15 minutes before I slowly made my way back toward the road. I looked through the grass and could see my headlights still beaming onto the pavement and the driver door still open. The man was nowhere to be seen. After scoping it out for another minute, I sprinted up and grabbed my phone, then ran back into the grass and called 911. I didn't know if he was still hiding somewhere, waiting for me, so I didn't risk staying up there. Eventually, the police showed up, though. I couldn't believe the man didn't drive away in my car. He must have just grabbed his backpack and run off into the other field, or maybe even tried chasing me through the grass, and just didn't find me. Either way, it clearly showed that his intentions were not to just rob me of my belongings, which makes the scenario 100 times more disturbing. I gave the police a description of the man, but there still haven't been any sightings. This was in 2016. My parents had just moved to the West Coast, and I was on my way driving there to visit them. A lot of the way there is pretty empty, with only a few gas stations spread out down the long highway. At some point during my second night of driving, my check engine light came on in my car. I wasn't exactly surprised because my car was old and not very reliable, but I wasn't really a car person either, and I had no clue what could be going on with it. I looked up where the next gas station was. It was another 30 miles away, but I really had no choice but to make it there. However, my car decided to make the choice for me instead though, as the engine suddenly cut out, leaving me coasting along the side of the road until I eventually stopped. I tried everything I could to get it working again. I even got out and looked under the hood for any possible causes of the problem, but I saw nothing. Honestly, I thought this was just the final leg of my car. In the meantime, all I could do was find a way to get help. I pulled my phone out, and I immediately felt my stomach drop as I had no service. I tried a few calls anyway, but obviously none of them went through. After 30 minutes of trying to find a solution, I realized I really only had one option, which was to hitchhike a ride. I'd never done it before, and I was kind of nervous, not really knowing what to expect. I always found it as a strange thing that I never thought I'd ever do. I stood out there on the side of the road and just waited. Every 15 or so minutes, a single car would pass by, but none of them stopped for me. This went on for hours. It was probably 2 or 3 a.m. before I saw the headlights of another car coming down the road. I stuck my thumb out, assuming it would pass by like all the rest, but to my surprise, they started pulling over. It was a black pickup truck, and I couldn't really see the driver until I walked around to the side of their car. He was a very skinny man with a long, thin face, and matched with his long black hair, it was a little unsettling. "Need a lift?" he said happily with a big grin. Something really put me off about this guy, but honestly I was tired, and this might be my only opportunity to get a ride, so I didn't pass it up. I hopped in the back seat. I felt like it would have been awkward if we didn't have some small talk, so I asked him what he was up to tonight. "Just cruising on the highway," he responded, like it was a hobby of his or something, which was kind of strange since we were in the middle of nowhere. I was surprised he didn't ask me what I was up to or why I needed a ride, but I tried to think of another question just to keep the conversation going. The man interrupted my train of thought though, when he looked at me for a few seconds in the mirror. "You don't have any weapons on you, right? Just making sure I'm safe," he said, with again that odd smile of his. I said no, thinking it was a strange question to bluntly ask, but maybe he really was just trying to watch out for himself. I don't know, but after that I stopped talking. 10 more minutes went by as I just stared out the window before the man made a sudden turn off the highway and onto a dirt road. I immediately sat up and looked around, realizing this was definitely not right. "Where are we going?" He shot a quick look at me, then continued to drive without answering. I asked him again, more loudly, as the fear was building up. "Where are you taking me?" At this point, I knew that no matter what, the next time this car stops, I was going to bolt, so I got ready with my hand on the door. As he drove down this beaten dirt road, suddenly a small farmhouse appeared in the dim lights. Its front door was wide open, and the whole place looked like it was decaying and falling in on itself. Once we got up closer, he suddenly slammed on the brakes. I jolted forward into the seat, and the man instantly swung his door open and ran around to the side door. I swung mine open as well and sprinted out, heading right for the tree line. The man ran around the car and came running up behind me, but once we were in the woods, it was so dark that I could only hear his footsteps and could no longer see him. even though he was just 10 or 15 feet behind me. I took a sharp turn, getting behind a tree and holding my breath. His footsteps came right up past me and continued further into the woods. A whole minute passed before I heard his creepy voice call out for me. Over and over, he'd repeat the same lines in the same tone of voice. "Come on, let's go back. I'll give you a ride. I wasn't trying to scare you." It was extremely disturbing. Even worse, I never heard his footsteps go back toward the car, so I had no idea where he was or if he was lurking in the dark somewhere nearby. I knew I had to leave though, so I started quietly walking in the direction of the main road, or at least what I thought was that direction. I really couldn't see anything. But once I was deeper in the woods, I pulled my phone out and turned the brightness on low. Somehow, I happened to have service now. I almost wanted to cry from the relief. I dialed 911 and had them track the call so they knew where I was. Thankfully, I made it back to the main road and met 2 officers there. By that time, the man and the car were somehow gone. I don't know how he managed to get out of there without being seen. As for the farmhouse, it was just what it looked like. Some old abandoned place, which makes it even stranger that the man knew exactly where it was and turned into it on purpose. I have no idea what he was going to do. I'm just glad I didn't have to find out. My family owns a huge plot of land full of trees, and on the edge of the property, they built a cabin. Compared to the main house, it feels a lot more closed off in the woods. This year, I took a trip up there around the end of October to see my parents and siblings. With the house being full, I volunteered to stay at the cabin for the few days I was there. This was the first day I arrived on the property. There wasn't a drivable road to get to the cabin, so I parked at the main house. All I had was a light backpack with my stuff, and I was only really planning on sleeping at the cabin, so I didn't bother making a trip there just to drop my bag off. Around 5, we had what I guess was a small party, as it was the first time in a while that all of us were together. We had some food and drinks and shared updates on our lives. It was a good time, but it definitely wore out my energy after a few hours. I told them I was going to head out to the cabin for the night and get ready for bed, so I threw my backpack on and left through the back door. The trail to get there was very thin and was about a 10-minute walk. I hadn't even thought about the dark though. There were no lights or anything along the trail, so I had to put on my phone light just to see where I was stepping. A little ways down, I randomly heard a stick snap behind me. I turned and looked at the path, but my phone light was awful and barely lit up anything. I figured it was nothing and kept walking. Only a couple seconds later though, I heard it again. It was like as soon as I started walking, something behind me started walking too, like I was being followed. "Who's out there?" "Alex, I know it's you. Not funny, bro." I called out, hoping it was just my brother being annoying. I knew if it was him though, he would have been cracking up by now. I felt really uneasy as the suspense of not being able to see anything really started getting to me. I kept walking, moving faster now. I heard leaves crunch several times as I continued making my way to the cabin, though I didn't turn around, knowing I wouldn't see anything anyway. I hoped it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe I drank a little too much. Whatever it was, I didn't want to be out in the woods any longer, so I hurried and finally made it to the cabin. I unlocked the door and got in, locking it behind me. After tossing my bag on the floor, I rubbed my face out of stress of whatever I just experienced. Then just then, a subtle sound came from the other side of the door. It was someone turning the knob and trying to open it, and right after they figured out it was locked, they banged on it. Not just knocks, like full-on hitting the door. I almost fell over just from the jump scare of it. They kept banging on the door though, and with nothing else to do, I walked up and looked out the thin window on the side of the door to see who it was. When I did, I saw a man wearing a dark jacket and heavy boots that I'd never seen before in my life. I only looked for a moment before his eyes shot over at me. They were full of rage, and he immediately followed up by pounding on the window. Then, out of nowhere, a voice yelled from the woods. The man paused, then sprinted in the opposite direction. About 30 seconds later, I checked out the window and saw my brother Alex running up to the cabin. I guess he happened to see the guy come up behind me as I started walking to the cabin, and after asking my parents if they knew him, he immediately came running for me. To this day, we've never seen him again and don't know what he was doing out in the woods on our property, or why he was stalking me. That night still scares the hell out of me to think about though. I was off of work this night and relaxing at home. My roommate was out of town for a couple of days visiting his parents, and I was somewhat of a night owl, so I enjoyed staying up late. It was around 12 and I was sipping on a beer while watching TV when a faint sound came from above me. At first I didn't even process it, like my body just ignored it. But after a few seconds, it kind of hit me as I realized it couldn't have been my roommate like it usually would have been. I looked up at the ceiling and muted the TV to try and listen for it again. A few seconds went by and there was nothing. The sound was so soft though, and with the TV being on when I heard it, I really had no idea what it could have been or even where upstairs it came from. Although this sounds pretty dumb of me, I really didn't feel like getting up and wasn't worried enough about it to feel the need to check it out. I opened the mini fridge I had next to the couch and grabbed another beer, cracking it open and taking a few sips to get back to relaxing. But before I could even unmute the TV, I heard that same thump sound above me. I looked back up at the ceiling, and after a moment, I could hear subtle footsteps slowly walking in the room right above me. My whole body felt like it went numb. I got up from the couch and went over to the stairs. I stood at the bottom and could hear a thumping sound resonating through the hallway. I called out my roommate's name. I knew it couldn't be him, but I was just hoping that somehow it was. After there was no reply, I started scaling the stairs and flicked on the lights to the upstairs hallway. It was empty, but the door on the far end was open. It was to my roommate's room, but I was 100% certain that I'd closed it the day he left, and I never went in there since, so there should be no reason it was open right now. My heart was pounding as I walked through the hallway and looked inside the room. It looked the same as it did when he left. Everything was clean and nothing was out of place. I then went around and checked every room upstairs and still found nothing. I didn't sleep that night and spent the next couple days on edge as I waited for my roommate to get home. I never heard those sounds after that night or had any doors randomly open like that. At this point, I don't know what the hell happened. Maybe someone found a way in and out without me knowing, or maybe it was something else. To this day, I still don't know. My name is Leo, and I work for a pizza shop in my small town. I don't do deliveries or anything, but I do mostly everything there is to do inside the shop. I make pizzas, organize the stations, clean, and get all the closing tasks done every night before I leave. My interactions with customers is usually pretty minimal, since we have a few high school kids to take orders and everything. But they're only scheduled until 11 on weekdays. The shop closes at 12:30, so any orders or customers that come in after that, I have to take care of. This was a regular Monday shift. Everything went smoothly for the most part, and at 11 my coworker left, so it was just me to close up. It's usually really slow, so I started the cleanup process. About a half hour before closing, a call came in. Praying it wasn't for a last-minute order, I picked up the phone. I said my generic "thanks for calling, how can I help you" line, and right after I finished, there was a quiet pause. Then they hung up. I put the phone down and said a few choice words, thinking it was a prank call from a couple immature kids. I went back to the kitchen where I was cleaning, but not even 30 seconds later, I heard the bell ring by the door. The timing was annoying, but I put everything back down and walked back to the front. A guy was now standing at the counter. He had a heavy coat on and a black beanie over his shaggy hair. His eyes were what really put me off though. He had dark circles and bags like he hadn't slept in days, yet his eyes were wide open. How can I help you?" I said, standing a couple feet from the counter. "I'd like to place an order right now." The way he said it was odd, and it very obviously told me that something was wrong with him. I said okay and asked what he wanted, but it almost seemed like he wasn't expecting me to say that. His eyes just continued to hold this disturbing stare at me as he struggled to respond. I looked away out of uncomfort, but my eyes fell on his hand that was partially out of his jacket pocket. He was holding a knife, like a typical kitchen knife. I think he was trying to hide it, but I could see the handle in his hand, and part of the blade was sticking out of his pocket. I felt my stomach drop and blood rush from my face, almost like I was gonna faint. I looked back up, and his eyes were still staring at me, but his face was stiff and emotionless. The sound of the door opening made both of us jump, and both of us looked over. It was some other random customer walking into the shop, and they immediately seemed to realize something was wrong. They stopped in place, stumbling over a few words, before the guy by the register suddenly walked past him and out the door. I used the phone to call 911 and tried to explain to the other customer what had happened. We also watched out the window as the guy got into his car and sped out of the parking lot. That was the last we saw of him though. What I think happened was he parked outside the shop and watched in the window as he called us. Once he saw that it was me answering the phone, I guess he knew I was alone, so that's when he walked in. If not for the random customer walking inside in that moment, I don't know what would have happened. He was clearly insane and armed with a kitchen knife, so it couldn't have been good. Since then, I still haven't seen him come back, and I really hope I never do. I was 17 and living in my parents' basement. It wasn't a trashy basement or anything. It was probably similar to what would be considered an in-law suite. My parents traveled for work all the time, so I usually wouldn't be in the basement unless I was sleeping in the bedroom down there, or playing video games, or whatever. This was during one of my parents' work trips. I was alone for a whole week. This night was a Saturday, so I didn't have school or really anything to do. I knew it was supposed to storm later in the day though, so before it was too late, I took my parents' car out to the store and got some food to make. While driving back, the storm rolled in. The roads weren't busy, thankfully, because even with the windshield wipers going at the fastest setting, it was still difficult to see. I pulled into the driveway and ran to the front door, getting inside and drying off. I then went straight to the kitchen and turned on the oven so I could make dinner. But almost right away, I heard something below me. It sounded like something falling over in the basement, like maybe a box or something. My first thought was that there might be a leak down there, and I got really worried about a possible flood. So I quickly went to the basement. I opened the door and flipped on the light, and as I walked down the steps, I didn't hear anything. No running water or any other sounds, and when I got to the bottom, everything looked okay. I walked through the main area where I had a small couch and TV set up, and then I went to the storage room. This was the only unfinished part of the basement, where we just stored a bunch of boxes and stuff. I opened the door and looked in. At first it all looked normal, and I was actually really confused at what I could have heard. All the boxes were stacked up still, and nothing was on the ground. But after a quick walkthrough, I noticed something really strange. One of the boxes sitting on top of the stack was open. And when I looked inside, everything was scattered all over the place. It was full of old trophies that my parents kept, and almost all of them were broken. It looked like the box had fallen and broken everything inside, and then someone quickly tossed everything back in. I felt a surge run through my body as I just stared at that box, then realized what this meant. I looked up and started scanning the room. It felt like suddenly, all I could think about was how loud the storm was outside, making me unable to listen for anything, which only got me more panicked. I started to back up, and just as I did, one of the boxes in the back of the room was knocked onto the ground, and behind it, a guy came running right at me. I booked it for the stairs. And I have to say, there was nothing more terrifying than hearing his footsteps climbing the stairs just a few feet behind me. The fear really got to me, and on the last step, I slammed my foot on the stairs and fell straight on the ground. Every horrible scenario just rushed through my head in that moment. But when I turned around, the guy came up to the top of the staircase and immediately ran for the front door, running out of the house. I got up and locked it behind him, then called the cops. They found an unlocked window that he climbed in through, but as far as why he came into the home, there really isn't any answer. I was getting out of work late due to a recent security issue at our company that had everyone working overtime. I would usually take the train to and from work, but since I knew I'd be out past the train's running hours, I had to drive. It was nearly an hour to get home. As I was getting out of the city though, I saw that my gas was almost empty. I didn't remember it being this low before work, but I could have been too tired to have even noticed it. I knew there was a gas station by my house though, so I was just gonna fill it up there. But 10 minutes later, an alert came up on my dashboard that I was extremely low on fuel. It had gone down way more than it should have in such a short time, and within a minute, my car was stuttering and barely running. I pulled over, and just as I put it in park, the engine cut out. I tried to start it again, but it didn't budge. I was both worried and frustrated, like how the hell was this even happening? I took out my flashlight from the glove compartment and got out. The issue took less than 5 seconds to find. There was gas clearly leaking. I had no idea how this could even have happened, since everything was fine earlier. But before I could do much thinking, a truck pulled up behind me. Their headlights were off, and they parked unnervingly quickly, like there was no hesitation. I stood up and looked at their windshield, seeing a couple figures moving around in there. "I'm okay, guys. Don't need any help," I called out, but they didn't pay any attention. They kept moving around until one of the doors opened. A guy got out, while the other, or others, stayed in the truck. Ironically, he asked if I needed help as he started walking toward me. The way he said it was weird though, with a smirk and a strange tone to his voice. Again, I said I didn't need anything. He kept walking though, until he was right in front of me, standing uncomfortably close. "Why don't I give you a ride home? It's the least I could do," he said, giving a creepy, forced smile. I declined his offer and quickly got into my car. Disturbingly, he stood there for a while, like an entire minute, just looking at me through the window and not saying anything. I just looked forward and called the police for help with my car. But the whole time, I could see him in the corner of my eye, standing right outside my window and just staring at me. During the phone call though, he walked back to his truck. I watched in the mirror as he got in, then slowly drove past me. We made eye contact as he passed by, and for a brief moment, I saw someone in his back seat. They were pressed up against the window with wide open eyes, and although I couldn't get a good look at them, I knew something was wrong. I don't think that person was inside that truck willingly. When he drove off though, the license plate was missing. Police showed up and I told them everything. There was a bit of an investigation where they found my gas tank was stabbed purposefully by someone. Likely what happened was the guy planned the whole thing out, following me until my car broke down and hoping to get me to accept the ride. Whether that person was truly in danger, we don't know, because the man was never found.